They thought she was just another technician, dust on her boots, clipboard in hand, and no place in the conversation. But when Marina Collins was publicly dismissed in front of an entire crew, she didn't argue. She watched, listened, and waited. What no one knew was that the woman they humiliated wasn't just part of the project. She helped build it from the ground up. This is the story of how one quiet act of disrespect triggered a revolution in leadership and respect. The mid-morning heat settled heavy over the sprawling solar plant site in Arizona, where aluminum scaffolding gleamed under a relentless sun. A cluster of workers gathered beneath a shade tarp, dust-covered boots shifting restlessly on gravel as the day's technical briefing unfolded. The mood was tense, not just from the rising temperature, but from the tension of leadership dynamics that had slowly begun to fray. Standing near the makeshift planning board was Marina Collins, a 38-year-old site technician with 16 years of field experience and a reputation for problem-solving that far outpaced her job title. She wasn't wearing a hard hat that day. She had just returned from inspecting the mounting racks on the southeast slope and walked into the huddle with a clipboard of notes and a quiet warning. She had found a misalignment in the anchor placements. A half-inch deviation now on sloped terrain could throw off energy yields across the entire installation once the panels were mounted. Her voice, calm but firm, broke the engineer's briefing. There's an issue with the anchor layout on string C-22. The land isn't compacted evenly. If we don't recalculate the pressure loads now, we might compromise the long-term stability of the array. The reaction was immediate. "Please let the engineers handle the numbers," came the sharp reply. The words sliced through the group like a blade. A few technicians froze, others dropped their gaze. The speaker was Devin Langford, the newly promoted lead structural engineer flown in just 6 weeks ago from a tech startup in Seattle. Young, white, and draped in credentials, Devin had made it clear from day one that he viewed the blue-collar workforce as background noise. "We don't hire site techs to critique system modeling. You're here to install, not lecture us on load balancing." The sentence echoed with a condescension that went beyond workplace hierarchy. Marina didn't flinch, but the flush in her cheek and the subtle shift in her stance said what words could not. This wasn't the first time her insights were dismissed, but today's rebuke wasn't just professional. It was personal, it was public, and it was racial. What played out next was silence. A dense, uneasy silence that filled the space where solidarity might have lived. None of the other engineers spoke up. A few of the installers shuffled uncomfortably. The cultural script had already been written. Titles outranked tenure, and black women in work boots were rarely seen as expert voices. Beneath the humiliation, Marina's mind was already working. She knew the ground better than any software model. She had been walking this slope since they first broke it with bulldozers. And while Devin's tone reeked of arrogance, Marina recognized something deeper, a need to dominate, to reassert authority, perhaps driven more by insecurity than malice. But that didn't make it less dangerous. Her restraint wasn't weakness. It was experience. Marina nodded once, scribbled something on her clipboard, and stepped away. She wasn't about to challenge Devin directly, not yet, because she knew something the rest didn't. This site, this project, wasn't just her job. It was her pilot program. The entire operation was backed by a clean energy fund she had co-founded with a group of engineers and climate advocates, most of whom didn't look like Devon. They just hadn't told the contractor team who the real stakeholders were. The humiliation had happened, but the reckoning had just begun. The rest of the midday briefing played out like a formality. Devon scrolled through schematics on his tablet, tossing around buzzwords like efficiency margins and site optimization. The group nodded along, more out of obligation than understanding. Marina stood just behind the last row of technicians, her face unreadable. But inside, her resolve was solidifying. She took a quiet step back from the group and pulled out her phone, an older model with a cracked screen but perfectly functional. With a few discreet taps, she sent a short message to a locked contact, labeled simply, Project Backline. Then she waited. The rest of the team began to disperse, heading back toward their assignments. Devon lingered, rechecking his numbers, double-tapping on digital blueprints he clearly trusted more than human input. Marina moved calmly toward the mobile trailer stationed on the edge of the site, its aluminum frame shimmering in the heat. She stepped inside without a word and disappeared behind the door. 20 minutes later, the vibration of tires crunching over gravel caught everyone's attention. A matte black electric SUV pulled up, sleek, out of place, among the pickup trucks and dust-covered machinery. Conversations paused. A few workers instinctively stood straighter. No one recognized the vehicle. From the driver's side stepped a woman in dark shades, her frame lean but commanding. She wore a tailored blazer over work slacks and flat boots. Her gait was deliberate, unhurried. She moved with the confidence of someone used to being watched and underestimated. The passenger door opened next. Out stepped a man in his 60s, silver-haired, holding a narrow leather briefcase. He was followed by another woman in business casual attire with a tablet in hand. The workers began whispering. Devon emerged from the array, visibly confused, but already adjusting his collar. "Who are they?" he asked no one in particular. No answer came. Then the woman in the blazer removed her sunglasses. Marina. Devon froze mid-step, his brows furrowed in disbelief as the dots started connecting far too late. His gaze bounced between the SUV and the woman he had dismissed as a mouthy tech just an hour earlier. Marina addressed the crew calmly. "We appreciate your patience. We'll need a brief pause in work operations while we conduct a site review. I'll be leading the inspection." Her tone wasn't arrogant, but it carried weight. The kind of weight that comes from knowing you belong. The kind Devon had tried to rob from her that morning. The older gentleman stepped forward next. "For those who haven't met me, I'm Franklin Holmes, director of the Greenpoint Energy Fund, which holds majority equity in this project." His voice was even, professional, practiced. The name meant little to most of the workers, but Devon's complexion turned noticeably pale. Franklin continued. This project was pitched as a model for self-inclusive and sustainable energy development. After today's concerns were flagged, we decided to perform an unannounced evaluation. Devon opened his mouth to speak, but Marina raised a hand gently, just enough to pause him without confrontation. No one here is being judged, but every voice on this team matters, especially when it comes to structural safety. That line landed like thunder. Around the group, shoulders relaxed, heads lifted. The installers, welders, and junior techs glanced at one another with a subtle shift in energy. Something unspoken was being corrected. Franklin turned to Marina and nodded. "Shall we begin?" Marina pulled a digital level and terrain scan from her belt pouch and walked past Devon without a glance. She headed back to string C-22, the same row she had flagged earlier, now with clipboard and team in tow. Devon remained behind, the full scope of his miscalculation hitting him in slow waves. He hadn't just dismissed a technician. He had dismissed a partner in the ownership structure of the very build he was hired to supervise. A woman who had not only walked the terrain, but co-financed its blueprint. And now she was walking back onto the slope with the full force of structural equity, policy leverage, and organizational trust at her back. It wasn't public punishment. It was something more powerful, quiet authority, surfacing when it mattered most. As the field team followed Marina into the slope line, one of the rig operators nudged another, told you she wasn't just another tech. They chuckled softly, not in mockery, but in relief. For the first time in weeks, the site felt aligned. By early afternoon, the energy on site had shifted completely. What began as a routine morning debrief had morphed into a high-stakes inspection, led by a woman many had written off just hours earlier. Crews worked in respectful silence as Marina and the Greenpoint inspection team moved row by row through the mounting structures. Every note she had jotted that morning was now a verified structural risk, confirmed by laser-level diagnostics and pressure scans. As word spread, more team members quietly followed the inspection trail, listening in. Some nodded, some looked stunned, others simply watched with a mix of awe and overdue recognition. Devon stood near the perimeter, arms crossed, trying to remain composed, but there was no salvaging the optics. Marina wasn't performing, she was leading. Her tone didn't change, nor did her stride. That made it worse. She didn't need to raise her voice or remind anyone of titles. Her authority didn't come from a name badge. It came from precision, from calm, from knowing. At 2 p.m. sharp, Marina called for a general operations pause. An open-air meeting was scheduled at the staging platform near the equipment depot. Workers filtered in from all sides, techs, engineers, subcontractors, even the supply truck driver who had returned early from his route just to see what was happening. Marina climbed the platform first, followed by Franklin and a legal compliance officer from Greenpoint. She didn't wear a suit now, just her work pants, and the same breathable utility shirt from that morning. But the posture was different. She stood upright, not defensive. She wasn't responding to power. She was setting the tone. Franklin stepped forward to open the meeting. I want to thank everyone for your flexibility today. It's not easy when plans change. But what we witnessed this morning, and what we verified this afternoon, raised serious concerns about communication and decision-making on this site. He paused. You've likely realized by now that Ms. Marina Collins is not just a technician. She's the strategic co-designer of this project and an equity partner in the Greenpoint Renewable Futures portfolio. A ripple moved through the crowd. Devon's jaw tightened. His eyes darted left, then right, searching for some kind of reassurance, but none came. No nods, no sympathetic glances, just silence. Marina stepped forward, her voice calm and measured. What happened this morning was not new to me. It wasn't shocking, and unfortunately it's not rare. She looked out at the group. There's a reason so many of us learn to keep our heads down, to avoid conflict, to bite our tongue when we see something wrong, because the risk of speaking up, especially for those of us who don't look like decision-makers, often outweighs the reward. Several heads nodded quietly in the crowd. These weren't just technical workers. They were witnesses to a familiar pattern. Marina continued, but ignoring problems doesn't make them disappear. Ignoring voices doesn't make them wrong. She turned toward Devon. This morning I brought up a misalignment on string C22 that could have compromised not just performance, but safety. That feedback wasn't just dismissed, it was ridiculed. Devon shifted, but said nothing. Franklin returned to the mic. We ran the diagnostics. The structural flaws Ms. Collins identified are real. In fact, our scans show early-stage instability that could have led to anchor drift within 18 months. The cost of correction would have doubled if we'd waited until the site was online. He paused, then added with clarity, "We consider this a serious lapse in protocol and judgment." The compliance officer stepped forward next. In accordance with our reporting structure, we've reviewed all internal communications, plan revisions, and change orders submitted in the past 6 weeks. Several deviations from approved designs were made without documentation or proper peer review. Devon opened his mouth, but Franklin raised a hand. Let's be clear. This is not about education. It's not about credentials. It's about respect. Respect for safety, respect for process, and most of all, respect for people. Marina folded her arms loosely. When someone points out a risk and gets laughed off because of their job title or background, that's not just a management problem. That's a cultural problem. The weight of that sentence lingered. This project was never just about solar panels, she said. It was about building something sustainable, starting with how we treat each other. In the background, the project's DEI liaison recorded the entire session. Moments like this weren't just operational, they were cultural pivot points. A construction site might seem like an unlikely place for a movement to start, but the truth was, this industry had long needed a reckoning. Data from recent industry reports backed it up. Despite growing racial and gender diversity in frontline roles, construction leadership remained disproportionately white and male. Psychological safety surveys showed that workers from underrepresented backgrounds were far less likely to speak up about safety concerns. And across the country, whistleblower protections were unevenly enforced, especially in subcontracted environments. That's why Marina's moment mattered, not because she caught a mistake, but because she stayed, spoke up, and followed through. Franklin addressed the group one final time. There will be a recalibration of the oversight structure on this site, and moving forward, we'll be initiating monthly field listening sessions where any team member can raise concerns directly to the project partners. No hierarchy, no retaliation. He turned toward Marina with a nod. This inspection is over, but the real work is just beginning. As people began to disperse, Marina stepped down from the platform. A few workers approached her, not with praise, but with questions, curiosity, and ideas. The shift had started. Not in the company's marketing materials or HR training decks, but here, under the sun, between rows of steel frames and bolts. Devon lingered in the back. Eventually he walked off alone toward the operations trailer. He wasn't escorted. He wasn't shouted at. No one even looked his way. And in that silence, a different kind of reckoning took shape. The kind that doesn't end in shouting or viral outrage, but in reflection, long, uncomfortable, and necessary. The meeting had ended, but the silence around the operations trailer was louder than before. Inside, the air was thick, not from dust or heat, but from the weight of what was coming. Marina sat at the head of the rectangular table, sleeves rolled up, her expression calm but firm. Franklin Holmes sat beside her, along with Lila Desai, the compliance officer. Across from them, Devin Langford hunched slightly, tie loosened, shoulders squared in defiance, masking dread. To his left sat two of his engineering colleagues, neither of whom had spoken a word since the audit was announced. Marina clicked her tablet and projected a file onto the screen behind her. "Let's go through this together," she said, tapping to highlight a structural audit log. Over the last 6 weeks, at least 9 unapproved changes were made to the installation design. Anchor specs were downgraded without record. Inspection reports were left unsigned, and pressure tolerances were edited in the master file without triggering version control. Devin shifted. "That's not what it looks like. Some of those adjustments were made for." Lila cut in gently. "Cost efficiency?" She tapped her screen. The numbers changed. We traced those adjustments to a spreadsheet labeled Q3 Margin Enhancements. That file links to a shared folder from your company laptop. It was last modified at 10:12 a.m. this morning, after Ms. Collins raised her original concern. A long pause followed. Franklin leaned forward. "We've also learned that performance bonuses tied to cost reductions were communicated to the engineering team via Slack messages, without disclosure to site leadership or project partners. Would you like to address that?" Devin exhaled hard, then muttered, "We were under pressure to hit quarterly benchmarks." It was a short-term measure. Marina's voice remained even. "Short-term decisions don't justify long-term risk, and in this case, that risk could have endangered workers and compromised system integrity." She brought up a second file, photos of early-stage microfractures in the southeast anchors. They matched the very warning Marina had voiced that morning. One of the engineers next to Devin suddenly spoke. "We warned him. A few of us did. When we noticed the altered specs, we flagged them. But Devin said we were overreacting. He said sticking to the schedule mattered more than internal panic." Lila nodded and kept scrolling. "We've also found falsified inspection certifications submitted under the name of a technician who was on medical leave that week." That detail landed heavily. For the first time, Devin's eyes widened in something close to fear. Franklin didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "There are 2 paths forward, Mr. Langford." He slid a printed folder across the table. Inside were 2 documents, separated by a thin divider. Option 1, termination for cause, includes formal notification to the state licensing board and civil proceedings for falsification, breach of safety protocol, and potential endangerment. Devin's mouth opened, but Franklin continued. Option 2, immediate resignation, with full forfeiture of performance bonuses and participation in a 6-month volunteer training program, mentoring underrepresented youth in solar technology fundamentals. Devin blinked. "You can't be serious." Lila spoke now. "This program already exists, and in light of current labor shortages in renewable energy, your technical knowledge could actually serve a purpose." Devin leaned back. His jaw worked silently for a few seconds. The silence stretched. Marina spoke again. "This isn't about punishment. This is about responsibility. You were trusted with oversight. You misused that trust. Now you have a choice. Defend your title or rebuild your integrity." He didn't answer. Not yet. Franklin rose from his seat. "You have 5 minutes. In the meantime, we'll be outside." The crew deserves an explanation. The workers gathered in the main yard as the inspection team stepped onto the same platform as earlier. Sunlight spilled across the concrete as faces turned upward, squinting but attentive. Marina stepped to the front, her voice projecting clearly across the space. "Thank you for your patience. I know today hasn't been easy." She took a breath. Accountability isn't about pointing fingers. It's about naming what went wrong and fixing it before it causes harm. She paused, letting that settle. "This morning we confirmed several safety violations tied to engineering decisions made outside protocol. Those decisions ignored team input and risked the stability of this entire installation." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Heads nodded. "We've made immediate personnel changes," Marina continued. "But this isn't just about one person. It's about making sure every voice, every perspective, counts." Franklin stepped forward. "As of today, we're launching a field advisory council composed of site staff across roles and identities. They'll meet monthly with our leadership team to review conditions, flag concerns, and suggest improvements." He smiled lightly. "Because if we want clean energy, it has to come from clean practices." The crowd responded, not with thunderous applause, but with something subtler. Respect. A quiet kind of solidarity. The kind that forms when people know someone finally listened. A moment later, the trailer door opened behind them. Devon emerged, folder in hand. His steps were slower now, not performative, just tired. Maybe for the first time, honest. He approached the stage and handed Franklin a signed form. He didn't speak. Marina looked at him once, not with scorn, but not with forgiveness either. Something quieter, acceptance of consequence. As Devon walked back through the crowd, no one jeered. There were no glares, just silence, and maybe on some faces, a trace of pity. The kind reserved for someone who was supposed to lead, but forgot who they were supposed to lead with. Franklin addressed the group one last time. "Let this day be a turning point, not just for this project, but for all of us. Because dignity and safety aren't extras, they're the foundation." Marina stepped down from the platform and joined the group below. The sun hung lower now, casting long shadows on the gravel. But for the first time since sunrise, those shadows no longer felt like weight. They felt like something lifting. The next morning, the site looked the same on the surface. Equipment still rumbled, dust still rose, and workers moved across the rows of solar frames like clockwork. But beneath the routines, something had shifted. Respect had found a voice. Marina didn't reintroduce herself that day. She didn't need to. Word had already spread across the site and beyond. Local suppliers, subcontractors, even other project teams under the Greenpoint umbrella had caught wind of what had unfolded. The story of a black woman technician standing her ground and revealing herself as the silent architect of the very project she'd been dismissed on. It traveled fast. What stood out wasn't just the twist. It was how she handled it. No shouting, no scenes, no revenge, just truth, structure, and leadership. Later that afternoon, Marina stood before a new audience. Not workers this time, but Greenpoint's senior operations team, joined by regional site leaders and a few representatives from the Department of Energy's Workforce Inclusion Task Force. A camera live-streamed the address back to headquarters. Behind her, the backdrop was intentional. Not a boardroom, not a showroom, but the site itself, Real terrain, real scaffolding, real people working in the distance. She wore a plain long-sleeve shirt and steel-toed boots, dust-stained at the hem. It wasn't branding, it was message. This isn't just about one project or one mistake. It's about what kind of culture we choose to build. Marina began, her voice grounded. What happened yesterday wasn't just a safety risk. It was a culture failure, a failure to listen, a failure to believe that insight can come from anyone, not just those with titles. She pointed to the row of panel mounts behind her. This site is a symbol, not because we broke ground on clean energy, but because we proved that accountability can happen without ego. That leadership doesn't mean waiting for approval. It means speaking when it counts. The task force members nodded. They weren't here for PR. They were here to understand how this model could be replicated. Franklin took the mic next. Marina has helped us see what leadership looks like when it's informed by lived experience, not just credentials. He scanned the group. We're restructuring our chain of communication. From now on, every Greenpoint site will establish a field equity council made up of workers across all departments, including contract labor. Their input will be weighted equally in quarterly reviews, safety protocols, and design revisions. One regional manager raised a hand. Will that really work at scale? Franklin smiled faintly. We said the same thing 5 years ago about launching solar farms in tribal territories, until Marina helped us make it work. Marina stepped back up. The truth is, people at the margins already know the risks. We've lived them. We just need the space to be heard, and the backing to act on what we know. Her gaze swept the group. There's a labor shortage in this industry. We can't afford to silence good people just because they don't fit the old mold. That line hit. It wasn't just timely. It was backed by data. Across the U.S., solar and wind energy sectors were projected to grow faster than the workforce could fill them. But while job openings soared, so did attrition, especially among women and people of color. The reasons were clear: lack of support, lack of advancement, and cultures that rewarded silence over substance. Marina turned slightly toward the workers in the distance. It's not enough to say we value diversity. We have to structure our projects like we believe it. That means mentorship, transparent promotion paths, and open-floor feedback that doesn't end in retaliation. The live stream chat, though not visible on screen, lit up with messages from remote staff. About time. Preach. Can we roll this out at our plant, too? Franklin made one final announcement. We're launching a peer-led training series, designed and delivered by frontline employees like Marina. Real-world strategies for leadership, inclusion, and decision-making under pressure. This won't be a top-down lecture. It'll be a bottom-up blueprint. Applause followed, but more importantly, people took notes. As the sun dropped lower over the western horizon, Marina walked the site once more. A few crew members stopped her, not to congratulate, but to share their ideas about grounding cables, about vendor delays, about things they never thought leadership cared to hear. She listened, not as a formality, as a practice. Change wasn't a speech. It was 1,000 small acknowledgments stitched into daily routines. Back at the operations trailer, Marina sat alone for a moment and glanced at a framed sketch on the wall. It was a concept drawing of the solar array, signed by its original designers, herself among them. At the bottom was a quote, Someone else had scribbled years ago during a planning session. We don't just generate energy, we generate trust. Now finally, that meant something. 6 months later, the Mojave Solar Collective towered in quiet triumph against the Arizona sky. Rows of solar panels stretched across the desert like disciplined soldiers, soaking up the winter sun. The final installation had been completed ahead of schedule and with 0 safety incidents since the policy shift. Yet the real transformation wasn't measured in output. It lived in the people who kept the array alive every day. Inside a glass-paneled conference room on the 2nd floor of the new operations building, a different kind of energy flowed. Marina Collins stood at the front of the room, guiding the quarterly strategy session. On the projection screen behind her, a dashboard showed site performance, employee engagement scores, and safety metrics. Her voice, steady and clear, filled the room, not just with numbers, but with momentum. "Let's walk through the new mentorship data first," she said, clicking through a graph that showed strong upward movement. Over the last 2 quarters, we've onboarded 48 new hires across 3 regional projects, 40% of them women or non-binary professionals, and 65% identifying as Black, Latino, or Indigenous. Retention rate, 91%. Scattered nods and quiet smiles followed. Walter Boone, now Director of Field Operations and a former foreman who'd once overseen turbine builds in Texas, raised his hand. That 91%. What changed? Marina answered without hesitation. Trust. Not just in leadership, but across the crew. People stay when they're seen, when they know their feedback won't get buried, when their ideas actually reach decision-makers. She pointed to another bar on the screen, and we've got proof. Incidents of anonymous safety reporting have dropped 63%, not because people are afraid, but because they're reporting openly, without fear of retaliation. The data aligned with national trends. According to the latest figures from the Department of Labor, construction and renewable energy firms that invested in psychological safety and field-driven leadership saw a measurable drop in worker turnover and a significant improvement in error detection during the planning phase. Greenpoint's approach, sparked by a moment of racial and professional dismissal, had now become a case study for sustainable culture building. Franklin Holmes entered the room midway through the session, offering Marina a small wave before taking a seat near the back. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. The tone had already been set. Marina advanced to the final slide. Now let's look at the training initiative. Photos of young people in hard hats filled the screen, teenagers and early career adults standing proudly beside mounted panels and grid simulators. The caption beneath read, "From student to site leader, bridging the solar talent gap." This cohort comes from partnerships with 6 different vocational programs and nonprofit community centers. We've trained 62 participants in the last 5 months. Of those, 44 are now working full-time in clean energy. Another 12 are continuing in advanced electrical certification, and most important. She clicked to the next screen. The program is now peer-led. The image changed again. This time, it showed Devin Langford, standing at a drafting table, surrounded by a circle of trainees. His posture was relaxed, his sleeves rolled up. The expression on his face, not exactly joy, not pride, looked closer to something earned, something reshaped. There were a few murmurs in the room. Marina acknowledged them. "Yes, that's Devin. He completed his 6-month volunteer rotation 2 weeks ago, but he's asked to stay on as a full-time training coordinator. A few raised brows. One manager leaned forward. "And you approved that?" Marina nodded once. "I did. He's not the same man who dismissed me last year. And more importantly, he doesn't lead the same way he used to. He listens now. His students say he explains things without condescension. They trust him." Another pause. Walter leaned back in his chair. Hard to fake that, especially with students watching. Marina moved toward the final bullet point. "We're also proposing a site rotation program, so that every project lead, including execs, spends 1 week per quarter in the field. No special treatment. Just boots, gear, and a name tag. It's not about surveillance. It's about remembering how decisions land on the ground." Franklin finally spoke. Approved. The room broke into soft applause. No one clapped for show. They clapped because it made sense. Because they'd seen what happened when leadership stayed in glass towers and forgot the dirt beneath the foundation. After the meeting, Marina made her way down to the on-site training center, a repurposed storage unit now fitted with solar simulators, drafting benches, and refurbished laptops. The walls were lined with schematics, scribbled calculations, and laminated safety protocols, half in English, half in Spanish. Inside, Devin stood at the whiteboard, answering a question about current flow through an inverter. His shirt was untucked, his notes were smudged, but his focus was sharp. One of the trainees, a 17-year-old girl from Yuma named Jasmine, challenged his explanation with a different formula. He didn't correct her. He asked her to show the steps. And when she did, and it checked out, he nodded and rewrote the answer on the board, with her name credited beneath it. Marina smiled faintly from the doorway. Later in the parking lot, she caught up with Devin as he loaded boxes into a used hybrid he'd picked up during his service term. No tinted windows, no performance rims, just functional. He greeted her with a respectful nod. "You headed out?" she asked. "Just to grab supplies. Our voltmeters keep disappearing." Marina tilted her head. "And how are you feeling about staying on?" Devin shrugged lightly. "I thought this was supposed to be punishment. But it's not. These kids, they ask better questions than I did in graduate school. They don't assume. They think around problems." He looked back at the training center. "And they've already learned the most important thing I didn't." Marina raised a brow. "What's that?" Devin smiled without irony. "To stop talking long enough to actually hear the person next to you." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Sometimes legacy isn't a statue or a slogan. Sometimes it's a technician who stays in the room. It had taken Devin Langford a long time to understand that redemption isn't an apology whispered in a hallway. It's a decision repeated 1,000 times after the apology has already been forgotten. In the months following his resignation and reassignment, Devin had kept a low profile. No press, no statements, just work. But not the kind he used to do. Now 6 days a week he clocked in at the Mojave Training Hub, a solar education facility that started as an experiment and quickly became a model. It wasn't glamorous. There were no clean desks or expensive suits, just voltage simulators, cracked whiteboards, and students who could spot condescension before you even spoke. At first they didn't trust him. A few even challenged him openly. "You're that guy from the video, right? The one who shut her down. He never denied it. He never made excuses." "Yeah, that was me. I got it wrong." Then he listened, not just because it was required, but because he wanted to understand what he had never been forced to see. His teaching style changed. He started asking more than answering, encouraging students to lead demonstrations, rewriting lesson plans to include lived experiences, not just formulas. His whiteboard notes weren't just clean diagrams anymore. They were messy, collaborative, annotated with initials that weren't his. And gradually, the students responded. They stayed longer after class, asked deeper questions, began referring to him not by title, but by name. Not out of disrespect, but because Mr. Langford didn't mean anything in a space where respect had to be earned from scratch. One afternoon, Marina visited the training center unannounced. She slipped into the back of the classroom, where Devin was guiding a group through system balancing across multiple panel strings. The whiteboard was cluttered with calculations, and Devin stood off to the side while a young trainee explained the voltage gap correction they had just discovered. He didn't correct her. He watched, listened, and nodded. When the session ended, Marina caught him in the hallway. That adjustment they found. How long did it take you to see it when you were on the field? Devin rubbed his chin, sheepishly. I never did. I assumed the software handled it. Marina smiled faintly. She didn't say anything more, but in that look, something shifted. The following week, Devin submitted a proposal to extend his volunteer role into a formal position. Not as an engineer, not as a supervisor, as a curriculum developer, an on-site trainer. The request raised a few eyebrows among Greenpoint's senior team, but Marina signed off on it immediately. We don't recycle people, she told Franklin in private, but we don't discard them either. Not if they're willing to rebuild with their own hands. So Devin stayed. In time, he expanded the program to include site visits, not just classroom sessions. Trainees shadowed techs, walked the terrain, and submitted their own safety reports, just like full-time staff. And when one of them flagged a mounting alignment issue before the design team caught it, Devin made sure her name appeared in the project report footer, alongside the engineers. By fall, the Department of Energy had begun studying the Mojave model, not just for its technical training, but for its approach to psychological safety and restorative leadership. The story of a former engineer choosing to teach underrepresented students after being removed from a leadership role, it resonated. Not because it was a feel-good ending, but because it showed a blueprint for transformation that didn't end at punishment. And transformation, as Marina liked to say, was the long game. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and cast golden light across the array, Devin sat on the edge of a loading platform, watching trainees gather their gear. He was joined by Walter Boone, who had dropped by for a surprise visit and stayed to observe the last workshop. You've come a long way from, we don't pay techs to think, Walter said, not unkindly. Devin winced, but nodded. That line still haunts me. It should, Walter replied, but it's not the line that defines you. It's what you've done since you said it. Devin looked toward the horizon. Some of them are better than I ever was at this stage. Smarter, faster, less arrogant. Walter grinned. So what are you going to do when they pass you? Devin shrugged. Keep teaching, keep learning. Maybe someday they'll teach me. A beat of quiet followed. You know, Devin added, I used to think leadership was about having all the answers. Turns out it's about asking the right questions and letting go of the need to always be right. Walter nodded. That's when you know you're finally ready to lead. Elsewhere on site, Marina stood beneath a plaque newly mounted in the welcome hall of the training center. It was simple, just brushed steel with engraved text. No names, no logos, just a sentence etched in bold serif type. We build energy from the sun, but we build power from the voices we once ignored. She ran her fingers over the edges of the plaque, not to admire it, to remember. Redemption wasn't a script. It didn't play out cleanly. It was messy. It took time. It meant confronting yourself again and again, until the version of you that caused harm gave way to the version willing to repair it. Back in the training yard, a new class of students had arrived. They carried toolkits and notebooks, unsure of what to expect, but curious enough to show up. Devon greeted them at the gate. No speech, no bravado, just a checklist and a quiet welcome. As they filed in, he looked toward the admin building. He spotted Marina watching from the balcony above. She gave a short nod, and this time he nodded back, not as a man seeking forgiveness, but as one offering something forward, something built, not on apology, but on change. On the anniversary of Mojave Solar Collective's groundbreak, a quiet ceremony was held at the edge of the project's western ridge. There were no microphones, no media crews, just the people who had laid the foundation, engineers, techs, community partners, and trainees, gathered under the slanting light of a late afternoon sun. Marina Collins stood near the overlook, facing the full sweep of the solar array. From where she stood, the panels shimmered like glass waves, rolling across the desert floor, humming quietly with the energy they captured and converted into something useful, something lasting. The site was fully operational now, feeding clean electricity to over 22,000 homes across the region. But to Marina, its most powerful output wasn't megawatts. It was memory. 1 year ago, she had stood on this same soil in a dusty work shirt, trying to be heard. Now she was here again, not with the intent to speak, but to listen to what had changed and what still needed to. Behind her, mounted on a modest stone pedestal, was a new plaque. It was deliberately unpolished, no corporate branding, just a quote etched into weathered steel. Respect isn't a reward for rank. It's the foundation that holds the whole thing up. The words had emerged not from a PR meeting, but from a listening session months earlier, spoken by a 20-year-old trainee who had survived 2 layoffs, a toxic apprenticeship, and a workplace where her questions were treated as interruptions. Her name was Tasha Gutierrez. Her voice now lived in steel. Marina stepped forward and laid her palm flat against the plaque. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from remembering. Too many people believe that respect is earned only by achievement, that you must win it, demand it, or wear the right uniform to deserve it. But the truth is simpler and more radical. Respect is owed, not just when someone speaks clearly, not just when someone has credentials, but when they're human. That belief had guided every structural and cultural decision Marina made after the confrontation that changed her trajectory. What began as a reaction to prejudice evolved into a complete redesign of how trust was built on site. 6 months earlier, the launch of Greenpoint's field equity councils had received cautious praise. Some saw it as symbolic. Others worried it would create too many opinions, slow down processes, dilute expertise. But the results were undeniable. Reported field violations had dropped 52%. Team productivity saw an 18% increase. And most notably, Innovation proposals from field workers had quadrupled, many leading to cost savings and design improvements that even the engineers hadn't predicted. But beyond metrics, something subtler had emerged: dignity. Workers no longer whispered concerns or feared being labeled difficult. They scheduled review sessions, documented their findings, and contributed to briefs alongside executives. Trainees shadowed field leads without intimidation. Bilingual signage replaced jargon-filled memos. And in one of the most meaningful changes, Greenpoint formalized a rotation requiring senior engineers to spend 1 week per quarter doing hands-on work under a site mentor, not to humble them, but to connect them, to remind them that technical brilliance means little if it ignores the hands that bring it to life. Marina had watched all of it unfold from both ends, from the trailer's project command center and from the gravel between panel rows. She never gave a speech about what she endured, never paraded her ownership status. She let the system speak for itself, and it did, through the growth of others, especially those who, like her, once felt invisible. That was the part no video ever captured, the fatigue of constantly having to prove yourself, the emotional labor of filtering truth into palatable suggestions, the ache of watching less qualified voices override yours simply because they felt entitled to. But the greatest form of retaliation, she realized, wasn't anger. It was redesign, changing the system that tried to quiet you, so it couldn't quiet the next person. Later that evening, Marina walked alone through the center of the site, where the rows of panels formed a symmetrical grid beneath the night sky. Soft floodlights lit the main paths, casting long lines across the gravel. Her boots crunched lightly with every step. As she passed the training shed, she paused. Inside, a new cohort of trainees were finishing up a hands-on lesson. Devon stood by the circuit panel, letting a student explain the step-down transformer process. He didn't interrupt. He just smiled, corrected a decimal, and handed her the dry erase marker. Marina watched through the window, unseen. Devon's transformation wasn't about penance. It was about participation. He no longer needed authority to feel valuable. He had found a different kind of strength, in service, in guidance, in rebuilding what he once tried to control. That kind of change couldn't be taught. It had to be chosen. As she turned to leave, Marina noticed another student waiting outside the center, a girl around 16, braids tied back, jeans streaked with dirt. She was studying a laminated site map under a yellow work light. Marina walked over and asked if she needed help. The girl looked up, unsure at first. "Are you the person who helped start this place?" Marina hesitated, then nodded. The girl smiled. "My mom said people like us don't usually run stuff like this." She was wrong. Marina crouched beside her. She wasn't wrong, she just hasn't seen it yet. On her drive home, Marina took the longer road out of the valley. The array vanished behind her in the rearview mirror, but the reflection stayed. What had begun as a public humiliation was now a national case study in equitable infrastructure and restorative workplace design. Media outlets had written about the incident. Some focused on the twist, others on the symbolism, but few captured the real victory. The real win wasn't that a black woman proved herself. It was that no one like her would have to again.